Welcome to day 11 of our coming out conversations. And again, this is all centered around the Lord's word in Revelation 18, chapter 4. My people, my children come out of her, come out of this Babylonian structure, this Babylonian system. And we've gone to great lengths in our previous conversation to describe what this Babylonian system and structure is all about. Yesterday, we spoke a little bit around the battle for Babylon, the battle to bring Babylon down. And in the bringing of Babylon down, the plundering, the taking back of what Babylon had taken that is rightfully the Lord's. Its people, its wealth, its treasures, its resources. And the book of Jeremiah 50 and 51 is what we've been using on this conversations. And today, as I read through Jeremiah chapter 51, a couple of things that I picked up that was very interesting because my mind immediately started to link them to the conversation from yesterday. And as I read from my New King James Version Bible, I noticed in verse 11, it actually says, make the arrows bright. Make the arrows bright. And then the other thing that caught my attention in verse 27, it also talked about blow the trumpet. And then in verse 55, it referred to because the Lord is plundering Babylon and silencing her loud voice. A couple of things that just struck me was the linkage back to the conversation about Gideon, how sound seems to be a critical part of the Lord's battle strategy. But also when I saw the make the arrows bright, it made me also think about the lamps that Gideon used in that particular battle. And then obviously the trumpet also came in, and it also made me just think even of Joshua with the battle around Jericho. So there seems to be something critical around the Lord using sound, light in battles. But I think the third component, as I started just to look at a few of the battles in the Bible, what I then also noticed was in a lot of the battles, you also have the Ark of the Covenant being carried first into the battles. So the Ark of the Covenant was a representation of God's presence. So there's this issue of covenant presence. There's a presence of the Lord in the battle. There is a sound of the Lord in the battle, and there is a light of the Lord in battle, the glory, the Shekinah glory of the Lord. And those three components seem to be very consistent across multiple battles. The Ark of the Covenant, presence, the sound of God, the voice of God, the trumpet, the shofar, the breath of God, being another element, and then obviously the light, the Shekinah glory of God being present. So that was just interesting for me as I thought about those different components. As much as they are components that are in the spiritual aspect of the battle, they also seem to be critical components within the actual natural side of things within each of these battles, taking the presence of the Lord into those battles. So again, I was really then starting to link up a couple of things, because with that, I started thinking about that what's up that I spoke about, I think it was yesterday or maybe the day before, a friend of mine from the UK who sent me that message, contrasting Daniel in Babylon, Joseph in Babylon, Moses in Egypt, and the different roles that they had. And I started asking myself the question, Lord, is another critical component of this for us to recognize what is our role. So if you look at a Daniel fulfilled his role within the Babylonian system, and he was able to not conform to the Babylonian system, but he still performed his role and did not defile himself for the purposes of what God wanted him to do within the Babylonian system. If you look at a Joseph was actually confined in a Egypt system, still representing a system of oppression, and how Joseph prospered in that system and was actually given stewardship of all the resources of the Egyptian system. So again, he was within the system, but he ended up being the most important person in the system economically and able to use and steward the resources within the system for the purposes of God. On the other hand, you look at a Moses, who, again, in the Egyptian system, his calling and his role was to actually take the people completely out of the system and take them on a journey to where God wanted them to be. But what was interesting again with Moses is how even in taking them out of Egypt, there was a plundering of Egypt, because God gave Moses and the Israelites favor to be able to take out the resources again and then shift those resources to where God had sent them and where God had prepared for them. So it's interesting in all of these scenarios. I was further thinking about Ezra and the book of Ezra and even Nehemiah. Again, a situation where they were in Babylon, but they were pioneers to begin to start to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple of the Lord. So they went from a position of being in Babylon, God giving them favor for them to actually, again, be resourced in Babylon, but yet take that resource and go and build what God had called them to build. And in fact, interesting, the kings, the pagan kings of Babylon, even funded the building, the rebuilding, and the pagan kings even gave them back the treasures of the temple that the Babylonians had plundered when they plundered Jerusalem. So again, very interesting and different scenarios based on the roles that God had given these people. And I started to then think to myself, is not a critical part of the strategy going forward being very clear in the role that God has given us in this whole battle over the bringing down of Babylon and the establishment of this covenant system that I believe the Lord is leading us into. And therefore, our role is absolutely critical. Is it the Daniel role? Is it the Joseph role? Is it the Moses role? Is it the Ezra role? Is it the Nehemiah role? And by the way, there are many other roles, the Esther role. There is so many of these different roles. But I really sense that God is wanting us to know, what is my role in this? And perhaps it even goes as far as saying, what is my role based on the environment that God has placed me in? That environment might be an industry. It might be a particular sector that I'm serving my calling in terms of my gifts, my talents. It could be a business sector. It could be as a doctor. It could be as a economist. It could be as a farmer. It could be as a trader. It could be anything. But I almost just felt God saying, okay, make sure you understand where I've placed you. What's the industry? What does that look like? And therefore, seek me, and I will tell you exactly what your role is in that place. So that was very uplifting for me today as I looked at this. And again, further, as I thought about the issue of the light, it actually made me think of very good friend of mine, and I'm sure a friend of a lot of you who are probably listening to this, Bart and Camp in Hong Kong. Bart is one of those people who has always advocated, and the Lord has given him such a passion for transparency in business, that everything should be done open book. Nothing should be hidden. There shouldn't be any secrets when there is trade, when deals are taking place. Everything must be equitable, where everyone is transparent to know exactly what they're getting, and therefore it's a transparent system. And I thought, isn't that the example of taking the light? Because when everything is transparent, nothing is in the darkness anymore. Nothing is secret anymore. Is transparency the weapon that we take in the natural to be able to shine God's light that breaks up the darkness and weakens the very power of this Babylonian system that operates through secrecy and darkness. So that was one thought that I was thinking about. I was also thinking about one of my spiritual fathers, who's based in Zimbabwe, who God has given such an amazing revelation on how to make the earth productive, to multiply, to be fruitful through agriculture, and how God has shown him a mechanism of doing farming based on God's ways. And I thought, again, that's the weapon of taking God's blueprint around an industry and being bold to stand for that strategy and for that blueprint, even if everybody else is farming in a different way, using all these so-called complicated mechanisms, chemicals, all the stuff that kills, whereas God has his life-giving way of farming that uses the way that he created the earth and the life that's in the earth. And I thought, again, another demonstration of what that looks like in the implementation and the execution. Again, I was thinking of another friend who's here in South Africa, who's in the process of establishing a cooperative-based banking platform. Again, completely using different principles to what the Babylonian system of banking uses. And I thought, again, somebody else who is practically making this happen. And as I thought about all of these things, I could go on and on with so many other examples, but God has placed us in an industry, he's placed us in a sector, he's placed us in a place where if we truly understand from him what he wants us to do and what role he wants us to play, I believe that's when we start to execute in the natural, even as we rely on the spiritual blueprint and the spiritual weapons that he gives us to actually do this. And I just realized that it's about operating in the opposite spirit. Where there's greed, we go in with generosity. Where there's pride, we're going in with humility. Where there's selfishness, self-ambition, we're going in with complete selflessness to serve. Where there is hoarding, we're going in and we're seeking to help the poor. We're seeking to help the helpless. We're seeking to help the widow. It's one of the most powerful ways I think we can operate in the natural to bring this Babylonian system down, is to go in with exactly the opposite of what the system thrives in whichever industry that we are in. And again, I was thinking from one of the things that Alan spoke about when we were going through the resetting diary. And one of the days he spoke about, how the centers of power often in these systems are centered around occultic religion, around mammon, around institutions, around trade, and around the plundering of resources. And as I thought about what Alan had said a couple of weeks ago, I began to realize that these are the very structures that make up the fullness of this Babylonian plundering system. It's about occultic religion that has lost God, that has lost the presence and the voice of God. It's about mammon, the worship of this mammon system. It's about these institutions that actually operate according to the principles of this Babylonian system. It's about trade that's done in secrecy. Everything is secret because, again, in secret, it's about plundering. It's about feeding self rather than doing things for the interests of everyone so that everyone can prosper. It's about the hoarding of resources, keeping resources within a small group of people who use them in a way to control others. So yeah, this was my conversation today, mainly, as I said, a conversation where I was starting to put several puzzle pieces together and just begin to see what God was saying through those puzzle pieces. So I hope you can also start to put some puzzle pieces together and begin to just determine where God wants you to be and what God wants you to do as he reveals to you your positioning, your industry, how he wants you to use these tools, the Ark of the Covenant, the sound, the light, all of these things critical, I believe, for this battle to bring down Babylon and to establish what God wants us to establish. So I look forward to our last time together in this particular set of conversations tomorrow. So God bless.